It's Dr. Cindy Gipson, C-I-N-D-Y-G-I-P-S-O-N, and I'm the Associate Director of Crisis Services here at Alta Point.
Wonderful. So obviously we have some new technology, exciting for Mobile police officers. Just walk us through kind of from start to finish. You guys received that grant. What exactly is this?
Yeah, so we've been working together for a number of years on co-response, where a clinician meets an officer out in the field. But since COVID, everybody has struggled with staffing, and sometimes the team may be in Grand Bay and the call may be here in Tolmanville. And so we talked with the Sheriff's Department in Harris County about what they were doing, and they were using iPad technology to serve as a force multiplier, where clinicians here at the Crisis Center 24/7 can respond. The officers have the iPads in their patrol vehicle, and all they have to do is hold it up for the individual who's in crisis, and we talk through what's going on and come up with a solution, and that may be us coming out right behind law enforcement, because the goal is really the overall goal is that they're not the first responders to a mental health call, because it really does take a lot of time. There were a significant number of mental health calls to 911 last year, and so ultimately we want to have a clinician responding to those calls where there's no weapon involved, no danger. But in the meantime, this helps us get law enforcement off the scene quicker. So we can talk to the person. Most of the time, like a third of the calls from last year, well, more than that, sorry.
That's good, you're fine.
Okay. Nate, what were the...
I got the numbers.
Oh, you have, okay. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you.
It's a lot of numbers to remember.
Yeah.
So we'll get it right.
Okay. So it was...
You're fine, take your time.
Yeah, a third of them were assessed by a clinician, and over half were responded to by trained officers.
That'd be perfect. So let's use that. Okay. Wonderful. Yes. Okay. Wonderful. So when an officer calls into a clinician, every single clinician that's on the other side is through Alta Point?
Yes.
Okay.
And they're trained in mental health crisis response, and so they're able to help quickly de-escalate the individual and really find out what they can do to help in that situation. If it's coming out behind the officer and managing, helping them get connected with medication, getting them here to the crisis center, anything to divert those individuals from going to jail, as jails all across the U.S. are our largest psych hospitals, and so the goal is to divert them when appropriate from arrest.
Very good. And obviously you kind of touched on this earlier, but officers do respond to these situations a lot of the time, but how critical is it to have somebody that's actually licensed in mental health to be there on standby?
It definitely helps. We train all the officers. Mobile PD and us have had a partnership for training for a number of years, and over half of the officers who responded to mental health calls last year had gone through training, and so they learn how to de-escalate. But a clinician is better equipped to know what all the services are at Alta Point, to be familiar with the individual a lot of times and help them make a decision about coming into treatment that an officer may not know exists.
For sure. And this is a partnership with telehealth we saw, so can you kind of describe that for people who might not know what telehealth is?
Yes. So we're using iPads to basically, the officer's version of the iPad has two buttons on it, where they can press the red button when another individual is in crisis, and it connects them directly to a clinician on the end, like me, for example. I have my iPad, and I just go through an evaluation with them and then determine the next steps. There's also another button on the iPad for the officers, and that's a blue button, which is if the officer themselves needs to talk to somebody. And officer suicide rates are higher than most other professions, and so we want to help where we can with that as well.
Very good. And clinicians are on standby 24/7.
24/7.
Doing this in shifts. I mean, what's that going to look like?
Yes. Okay. We're piloting in 3rd Precinct, and we're getting ready to roll out to the rest of the precincts over the next month. And so sometimes it's busy at night, and I get woken up, but that's okay.
Would you say it's a little busier at night sometimes than during the day?
Yeah, because we do have clinicians during the day who are able to go out, and so officers do still use the actual face-to-face interaction when they can.
Very good. And I guess what message are you trying to send through all of these partnerships? You guys are taking lots of measures because mental health is important in our community, and you probably see that on a daily basis. I mean, talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, mental health is certainly on the rise since COVID. We've seen increased numbers in depression, anxiety, even psychosis, and being able to address those concerns. One of the really interesting things is sometimes people are more comfortable calling law enforcement for help than admitting they have a mental health issue and coming to a provider. So this puts us in touch with a whole population that we had no idea needed services out there, and then we're able to connect with them and help them get on the right path.
Good, and officers are being trained in this right now, right? So when do you expect to have this rolled out?
We have started in 3rd Precinct already, and it's working very well. Next week we start with, or we go on to 1st Precinct, and the week after that 2nd, and keep rolling out week by week.
And then this measure is being funded by a pretty big grant you guys received. Can you talk about that as well?
Yeah, we wrote for a grant through the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is through the Department of Justice, and they're really focused on the law enforcement and mental health collaborative right now because it is such a big issue. You know, like I said, law enforcement unfortunately are the first responders in a lot of mental health crises, and we don't want it to remain that way. We want to do what we can to get the right person there and then get them to the right help they need as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. So you would say this cuts back on time, right?
Absolutely.
Having a doctor, I mean, pretty much at your fingertips.
Yes. Yeah, they're not having to wait for the clinician to get there. They're not struggling with, you know, talking that person down. We do all that for them, and it keeps them from going to jail most of the time. So that's a real advantage.
Okay, so you would say there are two different sides to it. I mean, there's obviously the law enforcement side, but there's also the health side too.
Absolutely.